Coming up on Bridge City News, Premier Jason Kenney speaks out against a white supremacist rally which took place in Edmonton recently. The group, which set up an unsanctioned injection site in Lethbridge, met with the Lethbridge Police Commission to plead their case. And U.S. firefighters have a new lucky charm in their arsenal as they battle wildfires along the West Coast.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The province announced today that more jobs will be coming our way. Thanks to $52.7 million from both the Alberta government and Ottawa, 300 jobs will be created. They'll be in the form of construction employment at various colleges and a university in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and Standoff. The funding includes a new campus for Red Crow College to replace the building destroyed by a 2015 fire. Funds will also go to support 2 Indigenous bases at the U of L and Medicine Hat College. The projects in southern Alberta are part of the $10 billion infrastructure spending announced as part of Alberta's recovery plan. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is condemning an apparent white supremacist rally in Edmonton. Police say they broke up a demonstration involving opposing groups on Tuesday night. Around 100 people were involved when fights broke out. Kenney says racists and white supremacists are un-Canadian and un-Albertan.
Obviously, we condemn racism and racial prejudice in any manifestation. It is un-Canadian and un-Albertan. And, I think it's unfortunate that we've got a small number of kooks who go around trying to get attention for a message of hate. I don't think we should give them the attention that they crave. This is a country that, while imperfect, is built on the concept of human dignity and equality of all before the law, regardless of race, ethnicity, country of origin.
Alberta's Justice Minister, Casey Madieu, who is black, also condemned the white supremacist rally in Edmonton. The Lethbridge Police Commission invites public to present their ideas at every meeting. Now this week, it was someone from the Lethbridge Overdose Prevention Society. The group has been fined by the city for setting up tents for an unsanctioned injection site. Simon Griffiths spoke on the issue.
We make sure that the police service is making sure that there is no illegal activity that is performed by the Overdose Prevention Group. It's the government of Alberta who is responsible for providing health services in Lethbridge, and certainly the Lethbridge Police Service and the Commission would encourage anybody needing overdose prevention services to use the Alberta Health sanctioned overdose prevention site, as opposed to these pop-up sites.
Another drug dealer has been taken off of our streets. Lethbridge police made the bust yesterday at an apartment complex in the 900 block of 15th Street South. Police seized around 148 grams of fentanyl, 132 grams of methamphetamine, 25 grams of crack cocaine, and more than $14,000 in cash. The combined value of the drugs is just over $40,000. 29-year-old Samantar Hussein of Calgary faces various charges, including drug trafficking and drug possession. Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro has added 2 members to the Alberta Health Services Board. Vicky Yellow Oldwoman and cardiologist Dr. Saya Zilke from Lethbridge are now on the board. Yellow Oldwoman is an experienced financial professional and member of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Dr. Zilke is an author and physician based in Lethbridge who specializes in the treatment of patients with heart disease. There have been 3 additional COVID-19 related deaths in our province today, which brings the total number of those who died from the virus to 269. There are currently 1,596 active cases in Alberta, including 32 here in the South Zone. As for our educational facilities, there are currently active alerts or outbreaks in 133 schools, which represents around 5% of all schools in the province. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says when it comes to kids being tested for COVID-19, parents can now get access to their children's test results quicker through My Health Records.
Effective today, all parents and guardians in Alberta can now access COVID-19 results for their children through My Health Records. Once a child is tested, parents will be able to log in and see their children's results as soon as they are available, anytime, day or night. This information is accessible to parents and guardians of any child under the age of 18. As an added feature, parents will also be able to print their children's COVID-19 test results and show them to others if needed.
Across the country, there have been 160,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, but fortunately, 136,000 people have recovered from the virus. Chances are you know someone who's been impacted by Alzheimer's. The progressive disease is being studied all around the world, including right here in Lethbridge. The University of Lethbridge recently received a $1 million grant over 3 years to develop treatments. Researcher Brenton McAllister spoke about some of the new technologies that he'll have access to.
What we're hoping to do is by basically targeting a certain ion transporter that's expressed on brain cells, we hope to increase the inhibitory signaling in the brain and kind of correct that imbalance early in the course of the disease, which hopefully will prevent further progression of the disease, or at least slow it. I really think to come up with something, we need to try a whole bunch of different treatment strategies, and so I think it's exciting that we can contribute something new there that will, it's a very early stage. Still, of course, we're still testing it out on mice, and that's, a long way from testing it on people, but, hopefully there'll be something promising there, and, might eventually down the road lead to some treatments that will hopefully help patients.
We get really excited about that because we work with people living with dementia and their families and their care partners every day. And so every piece of information that we can pass on that is founded in evidence created through research is just a really good thing.
This grant is the first for the U of L from the Weston Brain Institute. The province is formally recognizing the volunteer work being done by Albertans. Several people were nominated for the Alberta Northern Lights Volunteer Recognition Program, including a local woman here in Lethbridge.
I'm absolutely beyond honored because it took a community. It wasn't just me, it was our whole community of Lethbridge, for the people who stepped up to help families, individuals, and children through COVID. I'm born and raised in Lethbridge, and I have an extreme love for our community and every single person in our community. And of course, there was some malicious backlash. There was bullying and slander and hate. And so what I did with that was it actually fueled me to keep going and to allow my light to shine through this, to be supported by others who love Lethbridge and every single human being in this community. And that's why we're here, because we've stood together to connect the community of Lethbridge and assist those who might need some extra resources through COVID.
Mallory came to my house after I had some health issues. I spent some time in ICU. She showed up at my house with an Easter dinner, completely cooked, all packaged up, ready to go, treats for my grandkids.
The Alberta Northern Lights Volunteer Program honors those who best demonstrate community spirit, serve as a role model, and contribute unpaid service through volunteering. Live theatre is coming back to our province. Now that means the Rosebud Theatre is reopening their doors to theatregoers starting next month. The group's artistic director, Maurice Ertman, says this is a great opportunity to bring back live theatre, albeit in a limited capacity due to the pandemic, in the form of a one-person show of a classic tale, A Christmas Carol.
Nathan Schmidt, who is kind of one of our audience favorites, is going to be telling the story as if he's a street person in Victorian England, a rather eloquent street person, and he's going to be telling the story about how Scrooge went from being a miser to a benefactor. And of course, he's invested in that story because he's a street person, and so benefactors are good, right? And he'll be playing all the parts of the story.
A Christmas Carol at the Rosebud Theatre runs November 6th through December the 23rd. The Fred Flintstones of the world can rejoice once again since bowling alleys have reopened. Holiday Bowl in Lethbridge is offering their regular play and bowling leagues once again. As Micah Quinn explains now, there are new rules and regulations for bowlers during the pandemic, but still the same amount of fun.
The sweet sound of bowling balls hitting pins is now a constant. League play started up again at Holiday Bowl in late August, and bowling lanes are down in capacity due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's been a little slower than normal this time of year, as we are only allowed to have basically 50% capacity at the time. We're only allowed to use every second lane for league bowling and open play.
Sanitizing the equipment is a new aspect that staff have had to become accustomed to.
Sanitizing the bowling balls after each session is finished. So we sanitize the button stands, the bowling balls, the tables, the chairs, and the seating area. after every group has finished.
Michelenko says the seniors demographic is up compared to previous years, and those same seniors are enjoying a good game of bowling today.
I've been bowling for 33 years in Lethbridge. Before then was in Edmonton. So I probably bowled for more than 50 years in my life. I bowl twice a week, Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings. But it has changed due to COVID. We're split up. We're on every second table. And it just seems my bowling's going downhill with COVID too.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The City of Lethbridge's fall leaf collection program is now underway. Now, if you have leaves that need to be taken away, you have to make an appointment. Environmental Initiatives Coordinator for the city, Gordon Prest, explains how.
It's a little different than in years past. This year you need to call 311 to get your collection. Years past we drove through the city to create a little more efficiencies. So when you call, you're going to be given an appointment, and then we ask you to bag your leaves and put them out at your regular garbage location about 24 hours before your collection date. Make sure that they're in paper bags so they can all be composted. Since the season lasts for quite a while, if you have an early leaf collection, you can call back near the end to get another leaf collection. And there's no limit on bags. If you have 5 bags, you have 50 bags, we'll take them all.
Last year, the fall leaf collection program helped divert 93 tons of leaves away from the city landfill. A man died after a car smashed into the back of a semi-truck on Calgary's Ring Road earlier today. Emergency crews responded just before 5 a.m. this morning to the crash on Stony Trail in the city's southeast. A Honda CR-V and the transport truck were both northbound when the collision occurred. Officials say the male driver, who was the lone occupant of the car, was pronounced dead at the scene. A proposal to lower the speed limit in Calgary's residential areas has been approved by City Committee. The Transportation and Transit Committee passed a proposal to lower the speed limit from 50 to 40 kilometers an hour. According to city stats, around 25% of vehicle accidents occur within residential neighborhoods. Council is expected to debate on the motion next week. If it passes, the new speed limit could take effect next April. Saskatchewan has opened its first supervised consumption site today. The facility, which is operated by Prairie Harm Reduction, is located in Saskatoon. The group was formerly known as Aid Saskatoon. The group's executive director says the site will offer an outreach, education, a drop-in center, and family support program for the community. Federal Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole, who recently recovered from COVID-19, asked about Indigenous reconciliation during his first question period as Tory leader. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there is still a lot of work to do on the issue across party lines.
Can the Prime Minister advise this House why the government has not yet delivered its measurable goals called for in the 19th call to action as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report?
And I think there's an awful lot we need to do across party lines on that, whether it's passing UNDRIP legislation, whether it's concretely delivering for Indigenous communities across the country. And I'm very encouraged to see the Conservatives lead off with a very important question.
A couple of Conservative MPs say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has no plan for the failed rent assistance program. Tory finance critic Pierre Poilievre and the Shadow Minister for Small Business Pat Kelly had this to say in a release earlier today. Justin Trudeau's failed rent assistance program has ended, and the Liberals have no plan to help small businesses and their employees survive the second wave. The Liberals' rent assistance program has been a disaster. It has done nothing for 90% of small businesses in Canada. The program should have sent assistance to small businesses, not the landlords, as this would have helped businesses pay their rent during the pandemic. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he is proud of securing increased benefits for workers who lost their jobs due to COVID-19 and expanded paid sick leave in the Liberal government's pandemic aid legislation. Bill C4 passed the House of Commons with unanimous support from all parties yesterday.
We can start off by saying that this is something we fought for. This was something the Liberals were opposed to. They didn't want to bring in paid sick leave. We fought for it in May. This was our win. This is New Democrats had fought for paid sick leave, not a Liberal idea or an initiative. New Democrats fought for it because Canadians needed it. And the Liberals were going to cut the help that Canadians receive. They were going to cut it. That was the plan. They announced it. They made it very clear. Everyone was aware of it. Media had access to their proposal. They were going to cut the help that Canadians receive, and we fought back. So this is a stark difference. We believe in maintaining and keeping support for people in need and putting in place paid sick leave. The Liberals didn't believe in that. We fought and we won for Canadians.
Many people are still talking about the U.S. presidential debate from Tuesday night, including both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It appears as though they disagree as to whom the real winner was.
But what he's doing is what you do when you lose, so let's see what he does. I don't think he's going to get out. And I've got news for Joe. If you ever became president, you have to deal with some of the toughest people in the world. And Chris Wallace is very, very easy by comparison, I will tell you. I know them all. I know them all. Liberal media is upset that I took the fight to Biden and exposed his very dangerous agenda.
You saw how he made it pretty clear he's not prepared to accept the results of the election if it were to say he lost. And what maybe was the most shocking, you saw how he said he encouraged white supremacists by saying, stand back, but don't stand down. Don't stand down, we may need you.
More images and stories are coming in from those who have lost everything in the California wildfires. For so many, it has been, in a word, devastating.
A part of me is gone, and it burned up with the fire. Everything we built here, and that we made here, is gone. And I spoiled them rotten. I chopped up their food and their treats, and when it was warm, I'd give them frozen water bottles to keep their water dish cool.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the means. It happened so fast I couldn't dig him out of here.
Beleaguered firefighters in the U.S. have a new force on their side. It is a baby Yoda. A 5-year-old Oregon boy and his grandmother delivered a toy version of the pointy-eared force user to a donation center for firefighters to help lift up their spirits.
We decided to attach a little note, found a piece of paper and a pencil, and we were just going to write, "Thank you, firefighters." And Carver said, "Don't forget to put that if they need a friend, he can be a friend."
When my first post went, 5,000 shares, and everybody's asking me, can we watch him go farther? Like, can you start a Facebook page? So I started the Facebook page, and it grows by the day. And I get so many messages every day saying, thank you. I look forward to this every day.
We were able to take him with us on our first flight, on our first air attack mission of the day. And we took him up, and we're flying pretty high, so we can get a couple of those good pictures of him in the window looking out over the fire. It was just a blast. And the pilot that I had with me, Mike, he was all about it. Once I asked, hey, can we take Yoda with us? He's like, oh yeah, for sure.
It was a nice day to take out your bike for a ride today. Lots of sunshine and warm temperatures once again, and that trend will continue for the next week or so. Full weather details are coming up. We had sun mixed with cloud today, nice and warm. Tonight, it should be mainly clear with a low near 3. Tomorrow it should be mainly sunny with a high expected near 20. A great weekend is shaping up. Sunshine at 20 degrees as well for Saturday, mainly sunny at 24 degrees on Sunday. Monday, sunshine again with high expected near 22. A low pressure system returns on Tuesday, bringing more clouds, but above seasonal temperatures at 25. Cloudy and 22 degrees for Wednesday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 18 degrees with an average low of 3. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1957 at 30 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -9 in 1950. Sunrise was at 7:32 this morning, and the sunset at 7:10. Looking at the national forecast now, expect lots of sunshine at 22 degrees for Victoria, BC tomorrow, sunny at 20 for Vancouver. Sunshine at 19 for both Edmonton and Calgary. Expect light showers at 15 for both Regina and Saskatoon tomorrow. Mainly cloudy and 8 for Winnipeg on Friday. A chance of showers at 13 for Toronto. Rain at 10 degrees for Ottawa tomorrow. Montreal should have rain and 13. Looking at the Maritimes, expect rain and 19 degrees for Fredericton, New Brunswick. A mixture of sun and cloud at 23 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mainly cloudy and 21 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 19 degrees for tomorrow. Business leaders are calling on Ottawa to offer airlines $7 billion in 1% loans to help them survive the plunge in travel due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The heads of 2 pilots unions in Unifor say they're seeking a combination of loan guarantees and direct financial aid, but they say they're not seeking any grants. Unifor says Canada has not yet offered any sector-specific support to its airline industry. The unions are also calling for funding to develop a plan to ramp up tests for airline passengers as a step toward easing travel restrictions. TC Energy announced a new partnership with an Indigenous group. It is a minority stake in the Keystone XL pipeline. According to our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, this is a historic event.
This is one of the first sort of Indigenous partnerships and pipelines that I can think of that come to mind immediately that have actually sort of been proceeding. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this. We talked about it with the Trans Mountain expansion last year. Maybe there was going to be an Indigenous purchaser of that. There's the conglomerate looking to build the Eagle Spirit pipeline. So this is, it's an interesting step for TC Energy, for Keystone XL, and we'll just, have to bide our time a little bit and see what comes out of it.
Tyler Dawson will also talk more about an incident in Edmonton where fights broke out at an anti-white supremacist protest. That's coming up after business news. Google says it will pay news publishers $1 billion US over the next few years for their content. The internet search giant says it signed agreements with nearly 200 publications in Canada, the UK, Germany, Brazil, Argentina, and Australia. A spokesperson with Google says it will pay publishers to create and curate high-quality content for a different kind of news experience. Google first announced the program in June, which the European Publishers Council said was an attempt to stave off legislation to get it to pay for news content generated by others. A court in Ireland has ruled that the bread served at Subway restaurants may not be so healthy after all. The judgment published on Tuesday says the sandwiches could not be defined as bread because of its high sugar content. The U.S. chain has locations in 110 countries around the world, including many in Europe. The court says sugar in bread should not exceed 2% of the weight of flour included in the dough. It says a 6-inch sub from Subway contains 5 grams of sugar, which is the same as 2 plain digestive biscuits. Subway did not immediately respond to requests for comment from the story, which originally ran in The Guardian. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 63 points today to 15,527. The Dow was up 35 points to 27,816. The S&P 500 was up 17 points to 3380, and the Nasdaq was up 159 on the day to 11,326. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.60 to $40.31 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $2.48. Gold was up a cent to $19.0602 US an ounce, and silver was also up a cent to $23.80 US an ounce. Wheat is at $243 per metric ton, barley's at $237, canola's at $5.17, and corn is at $265 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 3 cents to $109.43, feeder cattle were down 43 cents to $141.95, and lean hogs were up $1.35 to $74.40. The Canadian dollar was unchanged on the day at 75.25 US.
Today's market numbers are brought to you by The Meat Box, your local butcher where quality matters.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, business leaders are calling on Ottawa to offer airlines $7 billion in 1% loans to help them survive the plunge in travel due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The heads of 2 pilots unions in Unifor say they're seeking a combination of loan guarantees and direct financial aid, but they say they're not seeking any grants. Coming up, an interview with our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, who has details about why Alberta Premier Jason Kenney was not impressed with a recent Liberals' throne speech. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News community calendar. The Helen Schuler Nature Center is hosting a food forest workshop presented by Mandy Sandbatch of Soulfully Soil on October 3rd and 4th from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Explore the world of food forestry and permaculture and discover how to create abundant perennial food systems right at home. Each day will include an outdoor tour. This workshop is open to those ages 16 and up. Cost is $180 and masks will be required inside the building. To register, call 403-320-3064. Lethbridge's Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Mondays and Wednesdays from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. behind Nicholas Sharon Arena. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/rovinggyms. Get to know your city and take part in the Lethbridge Scavenger Hunt. Download the Let's Roam Scavenger Hunt app, lace up your walking shoes, and head out with family to discover the best landmarks in Lethbridge. Put your navigation skills to the test while enjoying the journey at your own pace. No reservations, no tour guides, and fun for all ages. Visit letsroam.com/scavenger hunt. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Alberta's Justice Minister Casey Medew has condemned a group of white supremacist protesters who were hanging out at an Edmonton grocery store parking lot. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, is here to chat more about it. Tyler, when the counter-protesters arrived, that's when the fights broke out and police were called in.
That's right. So as you said, there's this sort of demonstration in, of all places, a grocery store parking lot sort of towards North Edmonton. And the clashes between the groups, police were called, sort of descended on the grocery store parking lot and sorted it out. Now, the Justice Minister has been under some, let's say, pressure for the last little while, as there have been a handful of sort of similar incidents about this, or like this, I should say. One in Red Deer recently, another one in Ponoka. And again, on Wednesday, he came out quite strongly against it, saying, you know, he respects the right to assemble peacefully, but you know, there's no place for these, I think he called them sad losers, hanging out in a grocery store parking lot. So some strong words from the Justice Minister. And, you know, it's just another example of, you know, some of the issues that we've been seeing across Canada, across the United States. They're happening here in Alberta too, whether in the big city or small towns.
Yeah, you mentioned that, what happened in central Alberta as well. Let's touch on that a little bit here. The protests involved violence and condemnation from provincial politicians. Some of the BLM protesters were assaulted in Red Deer, and there was that incident of a hit and run in Ponoka as well that may have been racially motivated.
Yeah, the RCMP are investigating the case in Ponoka. I don't believe they've made any arrests yet. That was during a protest a couple weeks ago now. And the other one in Red Deer, yeah, there was, you know, really extensive video footage of these sort of confrontations between Black Lives Matter protesters who were chanting, and then counter protesters telling them to get out of town, get out of Alberta. And, you know, some punches thrown, scuffles, some pretty awful footage actually out of that. And, again, Justice Minister had to scramble and you know, condemn it, saying that this is not acceptable in Alberta. So it's been a rambunctious, that's probably understating it. It's been a strange couple weekends around the province.
Do we know, Tyler, if some of these Black Lives Matter protesters were actually brought in, maybe flown in or driven in, or were they local people?
I believe they're mostly local people. My understanding is they're mostly local, but there have been these protests sort of happening around the province. So people might be traveling around the province. You know, given the pandemic and travel restrictions, I would be very surprised if people were coming, you know, exceptionally long distances. But there was also the sense in some of the reporting around it that there were, because these communities are sort of so close together, you know, you might be at a Ponoka protest one weekend and then in the one in Red Deer the next weekend. So I do imagine there's a little bit of travel, but certainly no, you know, indication of international travel or anything like that.
Well, yeah, because sometimes you get plants, right? People brought in specifically to stir things up a little bit, stir the pot. Now, the province released its opioid report during the throne speech last week, Tyler. It shows an increase in opioid-related deaths in our province. It also showed an increase in hospitalization, and fewer people were following their treatment programs. Now, since the UCP yanked funding on the supervised consumption site at Arches here in Lethbridge, government officials say more programs are underway to help people not only in our city, but across the province.
Yeah, that's right. So the interesting thing about these numbers is they're the second quarter numbers. So they ran sort of April, May, June, I believe is what it was. And so Arches closed over the summer, which means that which was the busiest supervised consumption site, I believe, in the country, certainly the province. And so this report does not show any sort of effects of that closure, since it was still open when the report was made. What it does show, as you said, pretty significant spike in hospitalizations. You went from about 2,000 hospitalizations in the quarter before that, so January to March, and then some 3,000 and a bit in the next 3 months. And deaths as well, 449 deaths, I believe is what the report said. You know, and we'd been contrasting that with the coronavirus, which has killed about 260 odd people in Alberta. So pretty significant increases in deaths. And I spoke with Jason Luan earlier this week, and he said, look, we've spent lots of money on addiction treatment, on detox beds, on mental health supports. These things are available. And he's really pushing back against the idea that there needs to be more supervised consumption sites. Perhaps there needs to be a safe drug supply provided by the government. Things like that. He's really pushing back against, has been since he became the associate minister. So I guess we'll have to see what the summer brought. When you compound the effects of the pandemic, people losing their jobs, all these other factors, I don't think it's a massive surprise there were some problems on the drug use front.
And Addictions and Mental Health Minister Jason Lewan also commented on the unsanctioned tent, the injection site that was set up here in Lethbridge, saying it's illegal, you got to tear it down. But I tell you, it's a real contentious issue here in our city, because the people with the Lethbridge Overdose Prevention Society is saying that the SCS truck that's set up across from the soup kitchen is not enough and more needs to be done. So they've been fined $300 for setting up that tent where they were not supposed to, but they're still fighting back. So remains to see what's going to happen here in our city. Now, Tyler, Premier Jason Kenney was not impressed with the Liberals' recent throne speech. He called it a full frontal attack on provincial jurisdiction and did not contain anything to help Albertans, especially for our battered energy sector.
Yeah, that's right. So Jason Kenney has been, a little bit quieter, I would say, a little bit less bombastic maybe than he has been for, the earlier part of his tenure as premier. But he was really back in sort of full fighting form last week. As you say, he called it a full frontal attack on provincial jurisdiction. There were many things in there that were provincial jurisdiction, from policing regulations to daycare to pharmacare. These are all sort of things the Liberals have promised before, but are now saying that they're going to implement them faster, spend more money, etc. As the Premier pointed out, there's not a single mention of the word pipeline in the entire 6,700-word document or something like that. Any mention of the energy industry, the oil and gas industry, are sort of in the context of retraining workers, renewable energy, things like that. So what we saw from Kenney was, almost a greatest hits reel, to be honest. He was talking about fair deal for Alberta. He was talking about fiscal stabilization and equalization. He was talking about Northern Gateway, Keystone XL, Bill C-49, C-68, all these things that, we've been talking about for a year now, that he's been talking about for a year, for longer, and that have sort of fallen a little bit by the wayside. He was really came out swinging against it, and actually was joined by some of the other premiers as well. Premier Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, not super impressed. Premier Francois Legault of Quebec, saying that there wasn't anything in there about topped up federal healthcare transfer payments. Certainly remains to be seen what a budget might look like, but Kenney was back at it. He was mad. He was condemnatory. Did not strike me as a very impressed man when he was talking about the throne speech last week.
I was chatting with Lethbridge Tory MP Rachel Harder as well, and she was talking about the throne speech, saying that not only was nothing mentioned about Alberta's energy sector, but Alberta farmers as well, so she wasn't too impressed either. Keystone XL, let's go back to talking about pipelines for just a second. Keystone XL builder TC Energy announced a new partnership agreement with an Indigenous group. It's a minority stake in the pipeline, and details will be announced, in the last quarter?
Yes, that's right. So one of those things where there was an announcement, not a whole ton of details on it. As I understand it, there's a handful of Alberta First Nations investors involved, and I believe one from Saskatchewan as well. So this is, the provincial government has sort of put money up backing Keystone XL to get it built. This is the pipeline that runs down to Steel City, Nebraska, I believe, from Hardisty. And so another embattled project been going on forever. But this is one of the first sort of Indigenous partnerships and pipelines that I can think of that come to mind immediately, that have actually sort of been proceeding. There's been a lot of discussion about this. We talked about it with the Trans Mountain expansion last year. Maybe there was going to be an Indigenous purchaser of that. There's the conglomerate looking to build the Eagle Spirit pipeline. So this is, it's an interesting step for TC Energy, for Keystone XL, and we'll just have to bide our time a little bit and see what comes out of it.
It seems it goes a long way towards reconciliation as well when you get the Indigenous groups involved and also cut them in for a little bit of a share. It creates jobs, it creates money as well for a lot of the Indigenous people. So many people would argue it's a really good thing. U.S. President Donald Trump issued a presidential permit to link Edmonton to Alaska via railway. And Tyler, it's not just going to be for oil.
No, that's right. A bit of economic good news this week. How often have we been able to say that recently? So yeah, presidential permit for this rail line. Now there already is rail sort of obviously in Alaska. There is already rail in Alberta. But this is going to sort of build a corridor that goes from Alaska over through the Yukon, through the Northwest Territories, and down to Edmonton, basically just linking up existing rail lines. I believe it's a $22 billion project. The proponents are saying it should create about 18,000 jobs. And the idea is that it'll take all kinds of commodities. Now, there has been talk over the years of sort of bypassing some of the problems in northern BC and on the BC coast by getting things like oil up to Alaska to ship them out of there. So yes, oil could certainly be one of those commodities, but other things like grains and things like that could be transported as well, because you can run a freight train as easily as you can run a tanker car. So we'll have to see what the timeline looks like when that's completed, but it's certainly a bit of good news when otherwise we haven't had a whole lot of that recently.
Tyler, the NDP is demanding an apology from the UCP for MLA Shane Getson's comments that CERB recipients were sitting around watching cartoons and eating cheesies instead of going to work. Around 1.6 million Albertans have taken CERB payments over the course of the pandemic.
Yes, that's right. So the NDP sort of condemning that, saying that it's rude and condescending. Some older viewers perhaps will remember, I believe it was Paul Martin's chief of staff or press secretary, can't quite remember which, saying people were spending money on beer and popcorn. So similar sort to that. But yeah, that was the gist of the comment, saying that business owners struggling to find people to come into work because they were making more money on CERB. Anyways, but just a small controversy this week, I suppose, that the NDP has picked up on and is saying is a bit tone deaf and things like that. And as you said, more than 1 million people in Alberta have taken CERB payments as of the last figures on the Government of Canada website. So, that's something like 1 in 4 people. It's a significant number.
Let's talk about the Auditor General's report, which says the province's disaster tracking system is not up to snuff. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the Auditor General looked into sort of our disaster management planning, and what he found was essentially that there's a patchwork of disaster planning and disaster monitoring. So these can be things like floods, these could be things like wildfires. I suppose you could add earthquakes to that mix. I'm not sure how big a worry earthquakes are around here. But basically, the big thing that he pointed out was that what the province doesn't know is having a good assessment of what the biggest risk is. And so you can't really plan well for these disasters if you don't know what they are. So, is it a giant wildfire? Is it significant flooding, things like that. So now the government says they should have a plan by early 2021, so not too far off. They're working on it, but this was the big issue that he exposed. Now, the other reason why this sort of matters is that if you look back on the money that's been spent over the past decade or so, you had something like $9 billion in money spent on disaster recovery between 2009 and 2016, somewhere about that. And it was only a few $100 million for the sort of set of years before that, 2003 to 9 or something like that. So, huge amounts of money spent on fire rebuilding, flood recovery, Calgary, Fort McMurray, wherever. So certainly the government wants to be on top of that. And by all indications, they are working on it. It's just, auditors' reports tend to come out at inopportune times.
Tyler, we recently had NDP leader Rachel Notley in Lethbridge, along with Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips, holding a town hall. Do the UCP ever look at the NDP, the official opposition, and say, why are you guys holding a town hall? We're the ones here in government. We're the ones who should be holding the town hall sessions. Do the NDP just want to kind of gather some facts and information so heading into the next election, these are the issues that you did not deal with when you were in power?
Well, I think the NDP is gaining its footing. There've been a handful of things that have happened over the past sort of 6 months that suggest to me they're gaining their legs. There was polling a week or two ago that we talked about where Rachel Notley and Jason Kenney are sort of neck and neck, and I think it's probably part of the NDP's long-term planning for the next election. I mean, it's obviously a long ways off. But, I think when they won the previous election, a lot of people looked at that as a fluke. A lot of people looked at that as people were tired of, 40 years of PC leadership. And what were the alternatives? So the NDP won. I certainly don't get the sense from the NDP, from the times that I've spoken with Rachel Notley, that they see it as a fluke. They I think, are obviously the second largest party. I think they feel that they are in a position to form government again. Certainly, Rachel Notley said that recently. The Globe and Mail had a headline saying that she said she would run again. things like that. So, I think it is just sort of long-term planning on their part, and building relationships where they think that they have an in, where they think they can pick up another riding or two, Lethbridge obviously being one of those places. So I think that's what's going on with the NDP right now.
Why do you think it is, though, that it really is two parties here in Alberta, the UCP and the NDP, and David Conn and the Liberals are not really making any headway, or even the Alberta Party? Why do you think that is right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. My suspicion would be that in the last election, people looked at their options and thought, maybe I'm an Alberta Party supporter, but I really want the NDP gone, so I'm going to vote UCP. Or maybe people said, I'm kind of a Liberal, but the NDP might have a better shot of beating Jason Kenney's UCP. So I think you had a vote split in that, like a tactical vote split for a lot of people in the last election, and that ended up with the minor parties getting no seats, which just really puts them in a pile of trouble. And then the other part of it, of course, is the pandemic happened. So we talked a couple weeks ago about the Alberta Party unable to find a leader just yet, which is a bit of a problem. They would struggle to have press events now because of physical distancing and things like that. The UCP and the NDP are able to access, the call-in systems for journalists to phone into. So I think there's sort of a logistical thing going on. I think there's sort of a hangover from the last election thing going on. And no doubt there's certainly some polarization where people are continuing to stick, I think, with the two major parties because they, dislike their opponents so much. They don't want to, risk throwing their vote away with someone who isn't going to win.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
In many nations around the world, the persecution of Christians is happening on a daily basis. Open Doors Canada says each year 260 million Christians are persecuted for their faith in Jesus, and that number is going up. Now, what can we as believers in Canada do to help support our brothers and sisters? Prayer is probably a good start. Joining me now to talk about it further is Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada, joining me from Mississauga, Ontario. Gary, welcome back to BCN.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, for those who may not know, what exactly is Open Doors Canada all about? What does your organization do?
Our organization supports persecuted Christians all around the world. It started 65 years ago with a guy by the name of Brother Andrew, who felt called of God to smuggle Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. And of course, since then, with the rise of Christian persecution, the ministry has expanded so that we work in over 60 countries around the world. We strengthen and equip Christians in the most dangerous places where to live as a Christian. And we provide discipleship, safe houses, trauma counseling, job training. We train leaders. We provide basic needs. We basically do whatever the persecuted church is asking us to do. So they're the ones that know what they need. And so we're here to respond to their needs. And we do that the best that we can.
Why does Open Doors produce the World Watch List each and every year? How is the list put together?
The World Watch List is put together by a lot of research that's happening basically around the clock. We have people that are in the field, people that work behind a desk, and their job is to put together the statistics, to monitor what's happening all around the world when it comes to Christian persecution. And so it's known as the best resource of its kind, and a lot of governments and different political organizations, you name it, they look at it for direction in what's happening with Christians and in general religious persecution around the world.
Now, apparently, in some of these countries where Christians are persecuted, women are doubly persecuted for their faith and their gender. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, in many cases, unfortunately, women are considered to be almost second-class citizens in some of these cultures. And because of that, not only are they persecuted for their faith, but they are doubly persecuted because of their gender. And there's a whole study that's been done on this and a lot of research that's gone into it. And Open Doors just produced a paper on gendered persecution and the implications of that around the world for women. So, yeah, you think of the persecution on one level, but when it comes to women, there's a double whammy. They are persecuted doubly.
Now, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Gary, you traveled to Malaysia and Egypt. What was the purpose of going to those countries?
The purpose of going was just to see the work that's happening, to encourage persecuted believers in those countries, just to see all of the work that we're doing there as an organization. And so it was a real joy for me to go and to meet with some wonderful people there, some brothers and sisters who really, when you get together with them, it's quite a humbling experience.
Now, a recent report is talking about the kidnapping of Christian girls in Egypt, and it continues unabated. Gary, a U.S.-based advocacy organization, Coptic Solidarity, is calling on the Egyptian government to step in and take a stand against these kidnappings. What happens to these girls once they're taken?
We don't have all of the details about what's happening to them, but this is a problem that happens not only in Egypt, but as you know, in Nigeria. You know, the Chibok girls that were taken, forced to marry Muslim men, older Muslim men, is often the case that the thing that happens to them, and the other thing that often happens is a forced conversion. So they're forced to convert to Islam as a part of their abduction. So a pretty terrible time for these young girls, and a lot of them are very young. Some of them are 12, 13, 14 years old, and many of them are still missing all around the world. It's not just in Egypt, but in many other countries as well.
How do the governments not look at these men as being pedophiles? Young children.
I know but for whatever reason, it's a societal acceptance. They accept it for whatever reason.
They're cultural norms, I guess, right?
Yeah, and they just turn a blind eye to it. It's cultural norms.
Wow. And I bet a lot of these young girls get new identities as well, probably new names when they're forced to marry these older men.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, things, Gary, are also apparently getting tougher for Christians in India. The northern Indian state of Haryana may become the 9th state to adopt legislation forcing conversion to Hinduism. What will that mean for many believers there?
Well, this is happening all over India, and we're hearing reports of atrocities that are happening. What's happened in India is that the present government that was elected in 2014 has a mandate, and they want to turn India back to a Hindu country by the end of 2021. So that's not that far away. And so they're very sympathetic to all of the people the Hindu extremists. And so a lot of extreme things are happening to Christians, forced conversions again. If they don't comply, their churches are burned down. There's some horrible things that are happening to them. And basically, the government is saying to be Indian is to be Hindu. And so, again, they turn a blind eye to the extremism that's happening. The other thing that we're seeing in India right now, of course, is with COVID-19 and with the aid that's being distributed in many of these places, and where you mentioned, indeed, in North India, these are often rural places. And so the aid is given to the elders of the community to distribute. And so the elders of the community automatically know who the Christians are. And they force the Christians to wait at the back of the line, knowing that they're not going to get any food anyway. And so they send them to the back of the line, and they usually go without anything.
Are they doing this something similar to those who are Muslim, not just the Christians?
In India, yes. They're doing a similar thing to Muslim people in India.
Gary, how have you seen COVID-19 impact our persecuted brothers and sisters living in countries like China, North Korea, and Syria?
In many of the countries, COVID-19, I mean, persecution was bad before, but for our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted, COVID-19 has just added another whole layer to that. And many of these countries already have, very volatile health health systems, economic systems, and so they're just not getting the help that they need. Again, in many places, because they're Christians, they're relegated to the end of the line or to the back of the line, and they're not able to get the medicine, the food, and all of the things that they need. And so in some places, they're just desperate. In India, I know that there are people who are starving.
So what initiatives is Open Doors taking to support persecuted Christians impacted by COVID-19, especially even in the northern camps in the Iraqi city of Mosul? I mean, the virus can spread quite quickly through the camps where so many have been displaced.
Well, that's the other thing, because they live in such close quarters. And, you know, we can social distance, and it's easy for us. I mean, I live in my house. I'm here. My wife is in her office upstairs, and we can do the social distancing thing. It's not a problem. But for these people, many times there's multiple families living under one roof. And so that becomes a problem. We've had to switch, to be honest, some of our programming, some of our priorities, where we were moving away from a lot of the aid stuff that we were doing in places like Syria, going to focus now in the next couple of years on more discipleship and training and so on. We've had to switch back and start to help with the feeding again.
Now, can you explain, Gary, what kind of impact these programs are really having on persecuted believers and their families?
Well, I think in many cases they're just keeping them alive, to be honest. And of course, the overarching thing is that they become very aware that that they're not alone, and that's so important for them to understand that there are people in the West who are remembering them, who have not forgotten them, who are holding them up in prayer. And so that's a big thing. But right now, it's just a matter of survival as well. So these the things that we're doing are just trying to help them stay alive right now.
What are some of the things that most people do not realize about the persecuted church?
Oftentimes when people think of persecution, they automatically think of violence, and they think it's always violent, but it's not. I mean, there is the violence, obviously. We just talked about the girls being kidnapped and so on, and churches burned and pastors killed, and there are all of those things. But for the majority of people, it's just the marginalization every day of the things that they go through. They're just, like I say, put to the end of the line. They are given the worst jobs in society. They're held back. Their kids can't get decent education because they're Christians. And so there are all of these things that are just constantly squeezing them into that place where the persecutors want them to be. And so it's not always violence, but it's the daily pressure, the daily squeeze that they feel.
Gary, as Canadians, what can we do to really help our brothers and sisters in Christ who are suffering in these countries? I mean, prayer is probably a good start, right?
Yeah, you said prayer at the beginning, and I was so happy to hear that, because if you ask them, that's what they ask for. If you ask them, what can we do for you? They always say prayer, even though it's obvious they need so much other stuff. But they would say, pray for them. And I would say, don't forget about them, and support them. Give them the prayer support they need, but also donate to organizations that are helping our brothers and sisters around the world who are going through persecution.
Now, you offer opportunities for people to join Open Doors for missions trips. Tell me more about that.
We go on trips of encouragement. Those have been suspended for this year, obviously, but we go on trips where we just go to encourage them. We call it our international presence ministry. So we don't go and make ourselves obvious and preach on street corners, or even build buildings and stuff like that. We don't do anything that will draw attention, but we go there to meet secretly with these believers and encourage them.
Last time you and I chatted as well, Gary, you mentioned countries like Pakistan, North Korea, and China, where persecution is really bad for Christians right now. Are those still some of the countries on your watch list?
Oh yeah, for sure. The Pakistan would be in the top 10. All of those that you mentioned are really high up on the list.
So where can viewers go to learn more about Open Doors and to donate?
They can go to opendoorsca.org. and they can sign up for our newsletter, for our prayer calendars. They can make donations there. And also I would mention that they can sign up for a Zoom prayer meeting. The first Tuesday of every month, we have just started a Zoom prayer meeting where we come together as believers in Canada to pray for the persecuted church. So we would invite anybody that wants to join us to go to our website at opendoorsca.org and sign up for that. And just inform yourself about what's happening, and then as the Lord would lead, just respond to what you're learning.
So Gary, what kind of rewards do you get out of being involved with Open Doors Canada?
For me, it's the reward of being with persecuted believers. I think it's just such the humbling experience of being with them. You know, we often think of ourselves, I was a pastor for many years, and you think of yourself as having a certain level of spirituality. But when you're with a persecuted believer and, you know, they're asking you to pray for them, and you see the incredible faith that they have, so often I want to say, can you please pray for me? I think I'm the one that needs the prayer.
Wow.
And so that's, I think, the gift. You know, it just kind of puts things in perspective for me, and helps me to realize that I don't really have it all that bad here in Canada.
Amen
as a
to
Christian.
that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada, thanks for joining me today from Mississauga, Ontario.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Anytime.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.